Okay, it's now 6:05 and time for us to start. Your Excellency, Ambassador Nestor Mendez, Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Your Excellencies from the diplomatic community, colleagues, Professor David Tennant, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, distinguished guests from the Ambassador's office, including Ambassador Henry Martin, Ms. Janelle Van Glenn Weigel from the Jamaican OAS office, colleagues, and students. Welcome to the Faculty of Social Sciences 60th Anniversary Lecture Series. 60 years, yes. We're celebrating 60 years of teaching and producing graduates. We're celebrating 60 years of advocacy. We're celebrating 60 years of research and policy making. Today, I have the distinct pleasure and honor to have as our guest Ambassador Mendez, who will share with us as the faculty celebrates our 60th anniversary and as the Organization of American States celebrates its 20th anniversary of the InterAmerican Democratic Charter. As our students know, the OAS is much older than 20 years. It is indeed the oldest regional organization. In this course, the main course, International and Regional Organizations, we have explored the history of organizations such as the OAS. We have looked at issues of power and cooperation, why organizations work as well as they do, and areas for improvement. We have explored some of the tensions and the synchronicities between states and non-state actors. We're eager to learn from what you have to share with us today, Ambassador Mendez. We have quite a range of students with us. We have first-year students, we have some second-year students, lecturers, colleagues, guests from the Foreign Service as well. Guest, we are delighted to have Ambassador Mendez, who is the 9th Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of American States. He assumed office in July 2015, and on March 20th, 2020, just a little over a year ago, was unanimously re-elected by the General Assembly to serve a second 5-year term. As Secretary to the Permanent Council and its subsidiary bodies, Ambassador Mendez is central to the deliberations and to the core work of the General Secretariat. In working to address the issues confronting the hemisphere, he has given priority attention to climate change and natural disasters, advocated for women's rights and gender equality, and has brought renewed focus to the plight of marginalized and vulnerable groups. He has also been at the forefront of promoting innovation, competitiveness, and entrepreneurship as avenues for unearthing leadership and talent and for empowering the youth of the Americas. Assistant Secretary General Mendez has worked closely with the Secretary General and member states towards the revitalization and modernization of the institution, in advancing its role and relevance in the hemisphere, in fostering partnerships for development, and strengthening regional interconnectivity. Ambassador Mendez remains driven to build upon the work which he started and fully committed to expanding on the progress achieved in positioning the OAS to deliver enduring security, lasting peace, progress, and development for the hemisphere. His professional experience spans a trajectory of over 20 years as a public servant and a career diplomat. So students, this is not a quick ambassador didn't become Assistant Secretary General 2 years after he gained his degree. It has been a long and distinguished career. His career has included being a career diplomat, including high-level representation in international and regional fora, having served as the ambassador of Belize to the United States of America, the permanent representative to the Organization of American States, and non-resident High Commissioner to Canada. He has also held diplomatic posts in the High Commission of Belize in the United Kingdom and at the Embassy of Belize in Guatemala. Ambassador's tenure as ambassador and permanent representative to the OAS was marked by his chairmanship of important institutional councils and committees, including the Permanent Council, the Committee on Hemispheric Security, the Special Committee for Migration Issues, and the Inter-American Council for Integral Development. Assistant Secretary General Mendez holds a master's degree in international policy and practice from George Washington University, a graduate level certificate in diplomatic studies from Oxford University, a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University College of Belize. I know that both Jossie and Rolando here, our students, have joined us from Belize as well. Assistant Secretary General Mendez is fluent in English and Spanish. He is married to Elvaro, whom I worked with and have fond memories of working on the Organization of Women of the Americas, doing work for women and children in the hemisphere. Ambassador Mendez, I welcome you warmly. I also welcome Professor Dale Weber, our Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal. Thank you for joining us, Prof. Weber. Ambassador Mendez, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Bassiani. It's wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much for having me this evening. Professor Dale Weber, Principal of the University of the West Indies, Mona Campus. Professor Luz Longsword, Principal of UWI Open Campus and Pro Vice Chancellor of UWI Global Affairs. Professor David Tennant, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences. Ms. Indira Prasad, Honorary Consul of Guyana in Kingston, former representative to the OS, and good friend, Ambassador Jillian Bristol, Director of UWI's Latin American Caribbean Center, Dr. Lisa Bassiani, Associate Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences and dear friend, OS representative to Jamaica, Ms. Janelle Van Glanwelen, members of the Diplomatic Corps, faculty and students, ladies and gentlemen. I always consider it a privilege to be able to address faculty and students of the University of the West Indies. And today I am especially honored to commemorate with you the 60th anniversary of the Faculty of Social Sciences and to interact, albeit virtually, with academic mentors and future leaders who are poised to shape our region and our hemisphere. As you may recall, the OS and UWI enjoy a history of productive collaborations, ranging from joint scholarship programs, development projects, conferences, and workshops, to shared expertise in advancing the work of the OS in Jamaica and the Caribbean region. The Faculty of Social Sciences, steeped in the cultivation of minds, has also molded nationals of OS member states who have served at their respective permanent missions to the OAS or within the OAS family. Such collaborations bear the hallmark of a mutually rewarding relationship, and the OAS commits to strengthening this bond for the benefit of the people of Jamaica and the region. I am immensely pleased today to launch a new collaboration with UWI aimed at bringing the work of the OAS closer to the people of the region. Through a virtual series entitled A Chat with the OAS, we are seeking to foster greater awareness of the role and relevance of the organization and its impact on the lives of our people, to inform on upcoming events and developments in the hemisphere, and to update on emerging opportunities. The series will afford direct access to OAS authorities and project implementers and present students a unique opportunity to pose questions directly to our OAS officials. The Office of Global Affairs of the UE Regional Headquarters will support this initiative by engaging its international relations students across the Caribbean. We look forward to your participation. As we start looking at the footprint of the OAS, its institutions, and its anchor instruments, such as the InterAmerican Democratic Charter across the Caribbean region, let me first highlight some specific instances of collaboration between the OAS and Jamaica in strengthening democracy, among which the following stand out. One, at the invitation of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, the OAS observed the general parliamentary elections in Jamaica in 2007, 2011, and 2016. Two, Jamaica's leading role during the negotiations and the drafting of resolutions in the 1970s, leading to the end of some of the worst dictatorships in the Americas. Three, the nation's support of processes to restore democracy in Grenada in the 1980s, in Haiti in the 1990s and 2000s, and in Honduras also in the 2000s. And four, Jamaica participated actively in the drafting of the 1991 Santiago Commitment on Democracy and in the Program of Work for the Promotion of Democracy, and provided valuable inputs along with CARICOM for drafting the 2001 InterAmerican Democratic Charter. Jamaica is known for its strong democratic institutions and is one of the OAS member states that routinely implements most of the recommendations made by OAS electoral observation missions. The OAS recognizes and appreciates the support offered by Jamaica and many Jamaicans who have participated in and even headed OAS electoral observation missions in the hemisphere, including your own associate, I was going to say our very own because I feel like it's our own, Associate Dean Dr. Lisa Paciani. Let's delve a little now into the meaning of democracy, the Jamaican experience. In discussing the 2019 ruling by the Constitutional Court on the constitutionality of the National Identification and Registration Act, former Prime Minister Bruce Golding wrote in April 2019, open quotes, "Democracy is not just about free and fair elections to choose a government. It is also about the recognition of the fundamental rights of every person and the means to secure those rights. It is about the separation of powers and the independence of critical institutions to prevent the concentration and abuse of those powers." End of quotes. He opined that the Constitutional Court's ruling of the day, although it appeared to be a defeat for the sitting government, was, open quotes, a validation of the independence of Jamaica's judiciary and the sturdiness of its democracy, end of quotes, adding that it was something of which Jamaica could be proud and protective. In September 2020, former prominent representative of Jamaica to the UN, Ambassador Curtis Ward, asserted that, open quotes, "Democracy thrives and flourishes in an environment in which there is strict adherence to good governance and to the rule of law by the governing political party when it assumes the reign of government," end of quotes. He further posited that, open quotes, "Democracy takes hold when equity is assured across all spectra of society when basic human rights and basic human dignity are guaranteed to all the citizens, when the marginalized and underserved are not only provided with opportunities and equal access to education and social upward mobility, but are given the requisite capacities to take advantage of such opportunities. End of quote. I do share his view that vigilance in promoting and protecting democracy and the rule of law must remain priorities. It is a testament to the commitment to democracy of the people of this great nation that Jamaica, a relatively small country with relatively limited resources, today stands as a beacon in guaranteeing these freedoms and ensuring that such liberties are protected and preserved for current and future generations. Let's look now at the OAS and the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The OAS is a unique forum where each of its 34 active member states, regardless of size, power, or scale, is afforded an equal voice. It has evolved into the hemisphere's principal multilateral forum for political dialogue and collective action since its founding in 1948, with core values reflected across its four main pillars: democracy, human rights, security, and development, which form the cornerstone of our organization's work and relevance in the hemisphere. As the oldest political organization in the world, the OAS is unstinting in leveraging its significant convening power to buttress the strength of democracy across the Americas. Against the backdrop of variances in styles of democracy, such as social democracy, nationalist democracy, and people's democracy, as defined by some governments. The fifth meeting of consultation of ministers of foreign affairs in 1959 delineated the factors which constitute representative democracy and established the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. The following core features were then linked to representative democracy: respect for human rights, the separation of powers, free and fair elections, freedom of information and expression. As the era of dictatorships in the Southern Cone drew to an end in 1985, a confluence of factors resulted in a renewed defense of democracy on the OAS agenda, including accession by Caribbean states to membership of the organization, and an amendment to the OAS Charter, which committed not just the member states, but the organization itself to the safeguarding of representative democracy. In 2001, the Declaration of Quebec City, arising from the Third Summit of the Americas, affirmed the shared commitment to democracy of heads of state and government who, mindful that threats to democracy take many forms, instructed foreign ministers to prepare an Inter-American Democratic Charter to reinforce existing OAS instruments for the defense of representative democracy. On September the 11th, 2001, worst or best remembered for the terrorist attacks in the United States, the OAS General Assembly unanimously adopted the Inter-American Democratic Charter at a special session in Lima, Peru, defining the essential elements of democracy, setting forth prescriptions for its promotion and defense, while providing to governments of the hemisphere a framework to guide their collective action with due respect for the principle of non-intervention. The Democratic Charter highlights the linkages between democracy and the inter-American system through the fundamental premise of Article 1, which posits that the peoples of the Americas have a right to democracy, and their governments have an obligation to promote and defend it. It further goes, democracy is essential for the social, political, and economic development of the peoples of the Americas. In pursuit of these objectives, the organization actively engaged on its new mandate, promoting representative democracy through studies and proposals by the Inter-American Juridical Committee, and establishing a unit for the promotion and strengthening of democracy, which is still at work through electoral observation missions in support of efforts to guarantee fair and legitimate ballot processes. Representative democracy is and has been, all things considered, not devoid of challenges. On the question of appropriate organizational responses to a disruption of the democratic order in a member state, the resolution is adopted way back in 1991, entitled Representative Democracy, adopted by the General Assembly at its regular session in 1991, states, in the event of any occurrences giving rise to the sudden or irregular interruption of the democratic political institutional process or the legitimate exercise of power in any of the organization's member states, the purpose of the ad hoc meeting of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs or the special session of the General Assembly shall be to look into the events collectively and adopt decisions deemed appropriate in accordance with the Charter and international law. Clear linkages are established throughout the Charter between representative democracy and the rule of law, as well as to citizen participation within the context of the Constitution of the respective state. Transparency in government activities and respect for social rights are also codified as essential components of the exercise of democracy. Guidelines are clearly articulated in Chapter 4 for procedural steps where there is a situation in a member state which, open quotes, may affect the development of its democratic political institutional process or an unconstitutional disruption of the democratic order or an unconstitutional alteration of the constitutional regime that seriously impairs the democratic order. Just as an aside, I remember the lengthy hours it took to negotiate this text, because by that time I was already there at the OS, working at the permanent mission of Belize as an alternate representative. That was a long time ago. The Charter speaks to the strengthening of political parties and political organizations and emphasizes the indispensability of the exercise of fundamental freedoms and human rights for the sustainability of thriving democracies. The elimination of all forms of discrimination is underscored as fundamental for the strengthening of democracy, with special focus on eliminating gender, ethnic, and race discrimination and intolerance in all its forms. The preservation of democracy is also linked to generating and maintaining sustainable gains in integral development towards the alleviation and eradication of poverty and the establishment of mechanisms for preserving and continuously reinforcing checks and balances to guarantee the quality of democratic governance. In full appreciation that democracy thrives in the complementary and enabling environment fostered by security, development, and respect for human rights, member states must work to ensure that peace and stability prevail and establish mechanisms to deter any obstacle which could stymie progress and security and impede continued improvement in the lives of their citizens. Let's now look at the Democratic Charter and the upholding of democratic order. The Inter-American Democratic Charter is widely recognized as the most comprehensive inter-American instrument ever promulgated on democracy. Chapter 4 of the Charter has been invoked in response to rising challenges to democracy on no less than 14 occasions within the last decade. In most cases, the Charter was applied preemptively to avoid the escalation of political institutional crisis, which could have otherwise jeopardized the democratic processes or the legitimate exercise of power, leading to the breakdown of democratic order. The Charter has also been invoked in response to situations considered disruptions of the democratic order. In all cases, the OAS acted with due respect for the principle of non-intervention and as facilitators of dialogue and consensus. I will relate just 4 of the many examples that speak to the important role played by the OAS in sustaining democratic order in the Americas. 1. Nicaragua, 2005. At the request of President Enrique Bolaños, the OAS sent a special mission to Nicaragua to facilitate a dialogue between the government and the main political parties amid a crisis that stemmed from differences over constitutional reform. The mission facilitated political dialogue that resulted in the adoption of the framework law for the stability and governance of the country, incorporating agreements between the political forces, which then generated conditions for the normal development of the electoral processes that eventually took place in March and November of 2006, respectively. 2. Honduras, 2009-2010. Perhaps this is one of the best known early cases of the application of the Charter. You may recall that after then President Jose Manuel Zelaya Rosales was deposed in a coup d'etat in June of 2009. By the way, this was only a few days after the OAS had hosted its General Assembly in San Pedro Sula in Honduras. The OAS Permanent Council adopted a resolution condemning the coup, invoked Article 20 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and entrusted the Secretary General to spearhead consultations among member states to promote the normalization of the democratic institutional order. The General Assembly adopted a resolution aimed at restoring democratic order, the rule of law, and the constitutional presidency of President Zelaya Rosales, which was rejected by the de facto government of the day. And ultimately, it led to the suspension of Honduras from the OAS. In June 2010, the General Assembly instructed the Secretary General to set up a high-level commission to analyze developments in the country's political situation. And in 2011, on full compliance by Honduras with the Commission's recommendations, the suspension was lifted and Honduras returned to the OAS as a full active member. Importantly, Jamaica's then Foreign Minister, Kenneth Ball, was a member of this important commission. Another example. Number 3, Haiti 2016. In line with a resolution approved by the Permanent Council, a good offices mission was deployed to Haiti in February 2016. Given the impending expiration of the term of President Martelly, the objective was to find an interim solution that did not violate the Constitution and was acceptable to all parties, including the Parliament, the opposition, and the President himself. Partly due to the mediation of the OAS mission, led by the then chairman of the Permanent Council. Some of you may be familiar with him, Ambassador Sir Ronald Sanders of Antigua and Barbuda. An agreement was reached in which President Martelly agreed to demit by the deadline, followed by the installation of the interim president, who was president of the Senate, Joselerm River. Another example, number 4, Venezuela 2016-2021. The Inter-American Democratic Charter has received significant attention in recent years as a direct result of the political situation in Venezuela. This is no news. It's being cited in regional and international news and verbal exchanges across the spectrum of opinions on the situation in the Bolivarian Republic. In May 2016, Secretary General Luis Almagro invoked the Inter-American Democratic Charter, presenting a report to the Permanent Council documenting the deterioration of democratic, humanitarian, and economic conditions in the country, requesting that the Permanent Council consider the situation in that member state. The Permanent Council conducted an extraordinary session on Venezuela in June of that year. And over the next 2 years, 3 more comprehensive reports were produced detailing the deteriorating situation in Venezuela and recommending the suspension of Venezuela's membership in the OAS. The Permanent Council has met more than 20 times to consider the democratic crisis in Venezuela, and 12 separate resolutions have been adopted. The Secretary General, Permanent Council, and the General Secretariat continue to remain seized of the situation in that country and continue to work to help restore the democratic and constitutional order. Let's look now at another area of work of the OAS, which is very important, but sometimes not as visible: conflict prevention and special missions. Fledgling democracies must work continuously to prevent and resolve conflicts, an element central to the role of the OAS as it constructs and maintains peace. The OAS has remained at the forefront of important initiatives for strengthening democratic governance, including the Inter-American Program of Judicial Facilitators and the Mission of Support Against Corruption and Impunity in Honduras, better known by its acronym in Spanish as the MASI, which ran from 2016 to 2020. Additionally, the role of the OAS in response to cross-border conflicts has been characterized by a culture of political dialogue in territorial disputes, such as those that existed between Colombia and Ecuador between 2008 and 2010, Costa Rica and Nicaragua in 2010, El Salvador and Honduras 2002 to 2004, and in the referendum between Belize and Guatemala, on which the path to progress continues. Moreover, the OAS has implemented observation and dialogue mechanisms, as well as cooperation projects that have contributed to the resolution of conflicts with long-standing historical roots. Among these are: 1, the mission to support the peace process in Colombia, best known by the Spanish acronym MAP, which is today active in hundreds of offices across that member state. The MAP has monitored and verified the demobilization of over 30,000 persons and the disarmament of thousands of weapons, and continues to oversee permanent support mechanisms for victims in the communities most severely impacted by the war. 2, the provision of technical assistance and policy guidance in the dispute between Belize and Guatemala. In this case, the OAS Peace Fund facilitated negotiations within the framework of the agreement to establish a transition process and confidence building measures between Belize and Guatemala, which was agreed by those 2 countries in February 2003, and the agreement on a framework for negotiations and confidence building measures between Belize and Guatemala, agreed on in September 2005. In December 2008, the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Belize and Guatemala signed a special agreement between Belize and Guatemala to submit Guatemala's territorial, insular, and maritime claim to the International Court of Justice. And this ongoing process continues to move in a positive direction. It is now being adjudicated by the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. One of the better known mechanisms of the OAS for promoting and preserving democracy are the electoral observation and cooperation mechanisms. The OAS became a signatory of the Declaration of Principles for International Election Observations in 2005 and it has been strident in its implementation of the two related mandates in its Chapter 5, which speak to the strengthening of electoral institutions and processes, as well as the deployment of electoral observation missions. Through its Department of Electoral Cooperation and Observation, also known as DECO, the OAS has developed technical tools and methodologies by which recommendations are made on key issues such as electoral organization, electoral technology, political finance, including campaign financing, media access, gender equality, and participation of indigenous peoples and Afro-descendants. Since 1962, the OAS has deployed more than 250 electoral observation missions to countries of the hemisphere for presidential, parliamentary, legislative, regional, and municipal elections, for referenda, for popular consultations, for primaries, and even for regional parliaments. These election observation missions are recognized among the organization's key tools deployed to promote the strengthening of democracy in the Americas and in observance of processes related to electoral justice, security, participation of people with disabilities, and overseas voting. Ladies and gentlemen, this year, 2021, is a good moment to pause and take stock of how far we have come. We can look back and recall that in the decades preceding the early 1990s, bloody coup d'etats marred the political scene across a landscape of instability, upheaval, and regression, laying waste to prior gains in social and political advancements, including human development. This year, as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the InterAmerican Democratic Charter, we correlate the adoption of the Charter and the evidentiary rise in free and fair elections in the hemisphere. We also recognize the regularity of the peaceful transfer of power from one democratically elected government to the next, and the fact that governments actually complete their terms uninterrupted in countries where heretofore this had not been historically prevalent. In today's reality, we cannot help but recognize the potential impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the state of hemispheric democracy and on democratic institutions in the Americas. The reality is that maintaining and buttressing democracy is an ongoing process. While there is still more work to be done, member states can remain proud that the common code to which they committed in 2001 and to which they remain resolutely bound continues to bear good fruit as the organization strives to uphold and defend democracy. I want to pause here for 1 minute and make an important point, which I do want you to remember. Although the focus over the last 20 years in the usage of our Inter-American Democratic Charter has been on Chapter 4, we should not forget that the Charter is actually made up of 6 chapters, including one, Chapter 3, that speaks to poverty eradication and development, and another one that speaks to the construction or the promotion of a democratic culture. I would dare to suggest that as our region, in fact, as the world starts to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, we should look at the instruments like the Charter, which has done a tremendous job in preserving democracy and promoting democracy, and also look at it and how it affects also the strengthening of democracy by looking after the well-being of our countries, not purely from a democratic and electoral institutional perspective. The Inter-American Democratic Charter affirms the cumulative expression of member states that representative democracy is the desirable a mutually recognized form of government of its constituent states, and that it is a value they all hold in common. This instrument underpins for our states the power inherent in joint action towards the strengthening of democratic institutions, in bolstering the relationship between democracy and integral development, and in confronting together all threats to democracy. This we do as an organization in collaboration with constituent members for the protection of the social, economic, and political gains we have achieved, and towards the sustainable development of our states in striving to maintain our hemisphere as a zone of peace. As we commemorate the 20th anniversary of the InterAmerican Democratic Charter, I close by reiterating heartiest congratulations to the UA Faculty of Social Sciences on its milestone 60th anniversary, and by expressing thanks to you for your interest. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
ASG Mendez, thank you for such a comprehensive and thorough lecture. I thought I knew most things about the OAS, but it was good to get a refresher and learn even more this evening. You have brought out quite a broad cross-section of guests this afternoon who we don't usually see. We're happy again that our principal, Professor Weber, is with us. Dr. Luz Longsworth has sent her thanks for an excellent lecture. She was with us but just had to leave. We have representatives from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Mrs. Marsha Korlaban. We have a representative and former student, Ms. Lufron Thompson of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. We have members of our model United Nations team, some of whom participated in the DiploHack Challenge that our team received a scholarship from the OAS and the State Department to participate in. We have a former ambassador to the US and to the OAS, Ambassador Stephen Vassiani, online as well. So you have brought out quite a cross-section of persons, and I would like to give them now the opportunity to ask questions or to make any comments on your very interesting lecture. So to our guests, I also want to acknowledge Mrs. Indira Prasad Saw, Consul General of Guyana, representative. So the floor is now open. We have about 15 minutes for questions. You may either type your questions in the chat or raise your hand to ask a question. I know we had one question from very early. One student eagerly wanted to know what are the prospects of working with the Organization of American States. She wanted to know, someone considering a career as a diplomat in foreign service, what are the best steps to take towards a career of this nature?
Okay, maybe I can address, Dr. Vassiani, with your permission, maybe I can address that one before we get into the other substance of the presentation. But I believe that, you know, a career in foreign service, serving your country, striving to promote the interests of your country, and trying to strive for a better region, a better Caribbean, a better Americas is something that really is fulfilling. Not because I chose it myself, but I really do believe that it is something that is tremendously fulfilling. So if you want to get into the foreign service, that's fantastic. That's brilliant. Make sure that what you study is in line with what is required for entry into the foreign service you're planning to join. in terms of working for the OS, there are several avenues to get in to become part of our family. And we constantly publish employment opportunities, vacancies in the General Secretariat and in our many offices, which we have spread across 28 countries in the Americas. But also there is another channel of entry into the OS, which many countries and many people have used successfully. And it's the following. So many times, when you're trying to get into an institution like the OS, there is a requirement for a number of years of experience. Students just completing their academic careers with not that much experience are often disadvantaged in terms of being able to compete against people who have had some experience in the field in which they're applying. However, we do have a channel for interns at the OS, where every year we accept a cohort, well, twice a year we accept cohort of people who come and they intern with us at the General Secretariat. Now, it's we don't pay the interns, they come in, they volunteer, they gain the experience. But what is important about interning is that not only do they get experience in the actual workings of the institution, they also develop valuable networks of contacts. And because our institution actually put interns to do real work, many times, if an intern performs splendidly, does an outstanding job in a particular office, whenever a vacancy comes up in that office, even for a short-term contract, that is the pool of people to whom the first look will be given. So you have intern in a certain office, they're looking for somebody to fill a post, they're looking for a short-term contact, for somebody to hire on a short-term contract. They look at the interns who have done well. You know, they can already do the job. They don't have that much experience, but they're learning, they have shown what they can do. That is an avenue that is always available, and I encourage people strongly to look at it. If you have the years of experience, if you have the qualifications, if you can compete, by all means, apply for the ones that are published on the website. Very importantly, remember that our organization has 4 official languages. And the minimum for you to be able to be hired to become a member of the OS staff is to have 2 languages, to be fluent in 2 languages. If at this moment you are not, I would strongly urge you, please look into becoming fluent in another language, in a second language. Any of the 4 languages for our purposes at the OS would do: English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. I do urge you, even if you're not planning to get into the foreign service or work in the multilateral field, having a second language bolsters your value and opportunities as a young professional, because you are competing in a global society. Do we have another question?
See another question yet, but we definitely have a comment from Martha Corbett Ball, who says she's a proud recipient of an OAS scholarship from the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information of Jamaica. And it was an OAS scholarship. She works with the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. And Mrs. Corbett Ball says that this experience was invaluable, and she thanks the OAS for that opportunity, because knowing foreign languages has definitely been an asset for her, and she's encouraging our students to pursue the same. Our students are required to do a foreign language in their first year. There is a hand raised by one of our students who I'm trying to unmute. Rolando, please go ahead if you can.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Excellency. So my question is, as a Belizean and as a Belizean yourself, how could you speak on how resourceful has the OS been in the adjacency zone between both of our countries? And if I may just slide in another question, what are the efforts at this current time for the OAS and the situation in Haiti?
So let me address the first one first. Maybe I should step back a little to lay the panorama so that it is understood. The OAS acts in response to requests from member states. We respond to the needs of member states. Belize and Guatemala asked the OAS to become involved as a facilitator way back in the early 2000s. The agreements that set in place how the two countries would manage their affairs and how the so-called adjacency zone, which was established in one of those, in one of the agreements I mentioned, was agreed by the two parties. And that is what determines what is the scope of the action of the two countries. So if you will remember, the adjacency zone is comprised of 1 kilometer on each side of Belize and Guatemala along what is claimed by Belize to be the official border, which Guatemala does not recognize. And that's why the case is being taken to the International Court of Justice. There is a specific regime that determines how matters that arise in that particular section are run, how to deal with what are viewed as illegal encroachments on either sides, illegal establishment of settlements on either side. The OS, for instance, whenever one of the parties, in many instances it's Belize, reports that there has been an encroachment inside Belizean territory, the OAS would deploy its technical people who are stationed in the adjacency zone to verify using state-of-the-art global positioning systems equipment to determine exactly where the situation or the incident or the settlement is located or the clearing is located, and determine based on that if it's on the Belize side or the Guatemala side of the adjacency zone. And then there is a specific regime in place for that, for steps to be taken to remove it or not to remove it. So all of this is pretty much scripted. It's there, it's agreed. All the OAS is doing is implementing what the two parties have agreed to do. I don't know if that answers your question with regards to Belize. Then if it does, then I will move on to Haiti. About 2 weeks ago, the Permanent Council approved a resolution on Haiti at the behest of a number of countries, led primarily by a group of countries of CARICOM, in which Antigua and Barbuda Ambassador Ronald Sanders was extremely active. And among other things, they looked at the situation in Haiti. They called for the respect for human rights, for the preservation of law and order. But the OAS also extended an offer of its good offices to the president and to the government of Haiti for the OAS to deploy a mission if Haiti decided that that would be helpful, to help them in the national dialogue and to prepare the ground for the holding of elections, which are due. So as I said, we make these offers, we respond to the needs of member states. The OS doesn't go barging in, contrary to what a lot of people may think. We don't come and impose ourselves. We respond to the needs of our member states, and we try to do the best to serve and respond to what those needs are.
Thank you. So you are highlighting the importance of the principle of sovereignty and the principle of self-determination in the OAS responding to requests from member states. We have two other questions. One from Ms. Thompson from the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. She says election campaign financing, monitoring, and regulation are relatively new in Jamaica. How does the OAS, this is a very specific question, not sure how you want to address it. How does the OAS view Jamaica's present efforts towards improving its democratic practice? And she wants to know if there's any guidance that the OAS would like to provide or extend to Jamaica in strengthening our campaign financing mechanisms.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I'm not familiar with specifically what are the efforts underway in Jamaica at the moment in relation to the regulation of or the management of campaign financing. So I cannot comment on specifically what is being done in Jamaica. However, this is an issue that is challenging, not only in Jamaica, it is an issue that is a challenge across the Americas. We see that it is an issue that very mature democracies are still grappling with. We see it coming up all the time in the United States. We see it all across the region. Now, since I don't know specifically what is being done in Jamaica, I cannot comment on that. But our Department of Election and Electoral Cooperation certainly has information on best practices and certain assistance, or give some direction on where this can be obtained. And if that is something that you're interested in, or if anybody's interested in, we would be happy to connect through our office with Ms. Chanel at our OS office in Kingston. And we would be very happy to put you in contact with the technical people who are the experts in the area of campaign financing.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from your former colleague, Professor Bassiani, who says, greetings. Thanks for your insightful presentation. Professor Bassiani asks, would you comment, please, on Cuba's place in the Organization of American States today?
Well, Cuba is still a member of the OS. Cuba, Cuba was suspended, and then the suspension was lifted. That particular resolution established certain criteria which would have to be met for Cuba to return and become fully active in the fold of the family of the Inter-American nations. They never indicated an interest in doing so. So they have remained on the margins. There is not much that is going on between the OS. Well, there's nothing much that's going on between the OS and Cuba. There are some of our affiliated agencies, however, in which Cuba does participate, such as ICA, certain things that have to do also with the Pan American Health Organization, they do participate. But in the wider General Secretariat, in the political bodies, they're just not there.
Okay, so Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us. I know there were some other hands, but we welcome this initiative of a chat with the OAS, and I know this will give our students and the university community more opportunities for one-on-one conversations like this with you and other persons from the Organization of American States. I want to give Ms. Andrea Brown the opportunity to say a few closing words to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bassiani. A pleasant evening to you all. It is my distinct pleasure to express gratitude to all who have contributed and participated in yet another successful guest lecture. A special thank you to our Pro-Chancellor and Principal Professor Dale Weber, the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Professor Tennant, and other distinguished guests. I would also like to express gratitude to the ambassador's team at the OAS headquarters, including Henry Martin, and the team at the Jamaican office, which is headed by Ms. Janelle Van Glanenwegel. Your Excellency, Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, a hearty thank you for your time, willingness, and invaluable contribution to this guest lecture. We look forward to future partnerships, and we wish you continued success in your endeavors. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for having me, Dr. Bassiani. It was great to see you again. Janelle, thanks for all your assistance.
Thank you so much, and thank you, students and friends of the faculty, for turning out in such wonderful numbers. Thank you, everyone, and we are
Good evening.
really grateful to you. Thanks to you and your team for making this
Everyone,
happen.
please keep safe.
Thank you, and the same to you.